Hi everyone, welcome to the 1 yard or jiffy blouse drafting tutorial. You might remember this top from one of my studio diaries a month or two ago, and I finally gotten around to doing a drafting tutorial for it because I don't know how you, but I love all these sort of clever 1 piece, 1 yard, make it an hour patterns you see online from the 20s, 30s, 50s. This is from the 30s originally, but I think it's been recycled over the years. But I always wonder about how it actually fits and stuff. So in this tutorial, I'm going to show you the basic version, which will look like the pattern you find online, but it will fit you because you use your own bodice block. So much easier than trying to draw all the measurements and trying to fit it. But I'm also going to show you, more importantly, an adaptation on how to put some fitting for your bust darts in. Because whenever I see something like that, I think, yes, it's on bias, so there's a bit on drape, and it's great when you're 1930s, completely straight flappers, if I hadn't gone by the 30s, it might be in the 1920s. But I always think for real, for any figure where you have shaping, where you have a bust, a waist, you want a little bit of shaping if you have a fitted style like this. So I'm also going to show you how to put in some darts and shaping to make it fit you better. So let's have a look at this blouse in more detail. Before we get to actually analyze it on the flat with some different necklines and draft it, I just quickly want to show you how it actually works, this top. So mine isn't completely finished, as I said, but I'm going to take it off and show you how it works because it is quite clever. So as you can see, I've got a Sharpie fabric. So the whole top is cut on the bias, and it's literally sort of weird geometric shape, which is basically 2 triangles and 2 half circles all stuck together. And in theory, it's a super straightforward top. This was like the tricky bit is fitting it to your block, which is what I'm going to show you. But the great thing is, once you've made it, you can put that in your suitcase when you go on holiday. You fold it flat, and then to put it on, you just put your head in, and then you take your 2 front triangles, and then at the back you would either have a button, another tie. In theory, you could actually just have an elastic at the back, but then of course you couldn't iron it as easily or lay it flat, so that's up to you. And then at the front, you can see I started making a tie on one side, so you can either have a bow, or again you could have like a nice statement button, or even like a little zip. That'd be sort of a bit more not edgy, but you know what I mean. But and you can do lots of different necklines with the top. And what I love about it, because it's cut on bias, it has the automatic drape, and it would look lovely in a silk, in a very fine cotton. You don't want anything too stiff, or even in a lovely drapey wool, or in a jersey, which would be slightly tricky to stitch, but would look really nice as well. So now you know how this top works. Let's quickly draw it out and draft it. So this is the original image I saw, but they've done it with this attached slip, but you could easily do your pattern piece like this, for example. It comes in lots of different shapes, or if you want to go for this one, you can also just have it straight and then attach a tie, maybe some buttons. So that's always your center front, your center back. So it's a 1 piece garment. And these sleeves, you can either keep them as that, or you can make them as short as you want to. And of course, the shorter you make them, the less fabric you use. So you can make the whole pattern smaller if you have less fabric. The one thing which is important, and they've made it really clear by doing a stripe, is that it's always cut on the bias. So it's cut on 45 degrees. So it's quite a straightforward pattern. The only tricky bit is to work out exactly what size to make it, but I'm going to show you that very quickly by using our blocks. I'm quickly going to show you one other interesting thing, because if you, like me, follow Liz von Willers on Instagram, she had a beautiful version of this top, but with a different keyhole. So you can really consider what sort of keyholes you'd like to have. So they've done a square, which I personally don't like because of the bias, but you can have it round, you could have it, so you could have it square like they did, you could have a V-neck, you could have a boat neck, you could have like this for Willers, you could have a neck like this, which is quite a nice key hack. Or if you want to stay completely at right angles, you could even have like a really interesting shaped neck like this. I think to stay with the straight of grain is probably quite a good idea. Let's draft this pattern. You can draft this pattern with any size block. I'm using my half-sized small bust blocks. If you're using a large bust block, you can also do some adaptations for a better fit. But for now, I'm going to show you the basic method, which doesn't use any darts. All the fitting and draping is done by the bias, which is why it works really well in a fluid fabric. On a piece of fabric, I've drawn my center front and center back seam and the bias, just to remind me. Trace around your front bodice, ignoring the darts, and I've placed my center front on my vertical line. And that vertical line is going to be both my center front and my center back, because the whole pattern is made out of one piece, and you only need to cut it out once on fabric too. For this pattern, I normally like to draw everything when do it on folded paper, but here we will need the whole pattern on paper in the end because it's on bias, so we can't really draw it on folded fabric. So you need a large piece of paper, enough to fit your whole bodice, and a bit extra to draw the ties. As I said, I'm not using any darts on this, so I'm now just going to draw around the center back, and I need the center back touching the line, and I also need the high shoulder lines touching. Can you see? And that will give you the most basic look. In theory, you could also add a center back seam and make the top a bit more fitted and the sleeve less flared. But I think the whole beauty of this top is that it's made out of one piece and has these really big floaty sleeves, and it's easy to make and easy to put on. But of course, the joy of pattern cutting is that you can adapt the style. So trace around your whole back, and now you already have the rough construction of your jiffy top. All we now need to do is add the sleeve. We want it to be sort of semicircular and going from the front to the back armhole. I'm going to use my sleeve block to help me work out the semicircle, but you could just as easily draw touching both the underarms and roughly equidistance from your shoulder. So I'm marking a line halfway between my shoulder points to give me a good starting point, and then I'm just going to use my sleeve block to get a guide for the edge of my sleeve. And you can make your sleeve however long you want it to be. I'm making mine quite short, So it's just touching the armhole, but of course you can make it as long as you want it to be. Next, I'm going to draw the circle. Of course, you want to make a trial and see how it fits, and then you might want to redraw the circle more curved or less curved. And also you could do a really nice look, for example, where you make it longer at the back, wider, sort of asymmetric. You could try a square one as well, so you get like handkerchief points. But I'm going with the basic sort of semicircle method. If you make it longer, of course, it's going to go further down your side seam, which is going to make it a bit bigger. So you have to be careful. If you make it too long, you might have to reshape it because you don't want a big gape underneath your armhole. So try to stay as close to the underarm point as possible. Next, we're going to draw in our ties, our extensions, and there are just extensions of the waistline. So just extend your waist either side. And then we're going to draw a line at 90 degree to our bias lines, or at 45 degree to our center back and center front. So you can see that line is going to be on the straight of grain, and we do exactly the same on the front. So our front and our back is going to be on the bias, but the side seams are going to be on the straight. Then you can decide how you actually want to put how to finish it. So you can either add a separate tie, which will make the pattern a bit smaller and means you can cut two separate ties, which will waste less fabric. Or you can actually just extend your triangle with a tie. It's up to you really what sort of style you're going through to make and how fussy or how simple you want it. So the next thing we're going to do is just check it's roughly all square, but that's just me wanting to have a square pattern. But of course, depending on your height, your pattern might be much longer, for example. But for me, I'm going to end up with roughly a square pattern piece, which will make it sort of quite nice to cut out. For your neckline, again, you can go with whatever style you want to go for. At the front, I want to avoid having anything on the bias too much because it's going to stretch, which is why a V-neck works really well. The other thing is to do that keyhole style, which is also quite unusual, sort of 1940s, 50s, quite flattering. Whatever style you want to go for, I'm going to keep my back as it is, but again, you could make it a V-neck, so it's on the straight of grain. And then I'm going to keep it really close. And then I'm going to go at a 45 degree angle to my center front, which means I'm on the fabric, I'm going to be on the straight of grain. I'm going to go away again, and then I'm going to go back. So create like a little diamond shape. You can also, of course, create a horizontal line. Either way works well. The only thing about horizontal line is going to be on the bias, which means it's going to stretch. You can add a little button at the top as well as a detail, which would be lovely. And I would probably add a facing to that neckline. And I might even, depending on your fabric, I would probably add some very light interfusing so it sits better. But you can see wherever neckline you go for, it's going to look really nice on the finished top to have a little button detail. And then either a triangle neckline or a diamond neckline. This is your top finished. Now we just need to fold it so you get the whole top. While it's on fold, add your seam allowance, and then you can cut it out on both layers with the seam allowance already added. For your first trial, I wouldn't even bother about adding seam allowance to the sleeve and the neckline because you want to check it fits first. But add seam allowance everywhere else, pin it together, and then you can cut it out. And your sleeve and your neckline will be probably the main points where you want to get your fit right, and also the height of neckline and the sleeve length. Now I'm going to show you how to adapt your pattern for a larger bust. What I always find annoying when you wear it is you get lots of crunchiness where your dart is, even if it's on bias. Especially if you're a larger bust, it's going to be more of an impact because the bias has to move around your whole body, which unless it's a very drapey fabric might look strange. So I'm now going to show you how to create the first sort of one-piece style, but with some shaping. And to tell you the truth, even on a smaller bust, it won't hurt. I'm going to make another version for me, and I'm going to add some darts. So I'm going to show you how to do it with a full bust. And the method is basically the same. We're just going to add one step. So just trace around it again. This time make sure to mark your darts. Put your back on and again mark your darts on the back. Because it's on bias, I don't actually think you need to do a dart on the back, but you might want to. The whole aim of adding shaping is to still keep the whole beauty of it being on bias and we have a straight of grayness. So I'm actually going to put in some French darts, but I'm going to make them exactly on the straight of grain, which is why I've drawn all the bias lines as well. On the back, if you want to add the shaping, it will be the same principle. As it's on bias, you will get some shaping from just the fabric stretching. So I'm not actually going to close both my darts, but of course you could close half a dart, or you could just ignore the waist dart again at the front and just close your whole bust dart. It all really depends on your proportions to a certain degree. Whatever you do is, first of all, you draw a French seam which is perfectly at 45 degrees to your center front. I think that just be really important so it disappears into your fabric, especially if you're making the fabric into a stripe. So you could even lay your fabric later on so the stripe is where the dart is. You could either make a single French dart or you could make them double French darts. I think if you got a fabric with a narrow stripe, double French darts look really nice. Only thing to be a bit more careful with this double French dart is to make sure that once they're closed, they will still be parallel. Whatever you do is you cut into all the lines, so whether you're doing a single or a double French dart, use the lines you're using. And then you close your original darts and open a new dart. So as I said, I'm gonna go with adding half the shaping, which means the top still has a bit of drape. It's not too tightly fitted, but of course it's up to your taste. So if you want to have more shaping, I would close my complete bust dart and I would leave my waist dart open, and if it's still too loose, then I would close both my bust dart and the waist dart into two double French darts. But for now I'm going with half and half, so I just got a bit of shaping. So it should give me less of the annoying gathers and crunchiness and sort of weird lines and creases, but still work with the drape of the fabric. I'm just going to put another piece of paper in. And then the next thing I'm going to check is that it's is on the straight of grain. So I want to make sure in a second that it is completely parallel to my blue lines, so it disappears. If you do it on the back, it's exactly the same principle. Next, you need to pin your new dart closed, and then we can find out whether it's straight. To help me with it, I'm also going to draw a line for my bust point, which is also 45 degrees. So it's just a parallel line to all my bias lines. And that's really just to double check it's not slightly wonky. And if you're using a plain fabric, to a certain degree, it doesn't really matter. But if you're using a stripe, it's really going to stand out. So if you got our dart exactly parallel to our stripe or our straight of grain, once we've put it together in fabric, from the front it's going to look like it's one piece and still have the shaping. So now I'm going to pin it together to see it's fine, and I just quickly made a mark on how wide my dart is, just so I can see if it's not straight I can move it slightly up and down but keep the same dart width. So I'm just folding it close, and on paper it's always going to be not perfect, but try to get as parallel as you can. Get the sides of the dart matching. So you can see this looks pretty good parallel. You can actually put your pattern master on top and check. If you're using double French darts, it should still work, but really make sure to check. Now, while it's all pinned together, I'm gonna draw my triangle extension and cut it all out. And of course, what you might want to do is add seam allowance at the same time while it's all pinned together. So I'm just doing the same thing, is extending my waist and then drawing up to my armhole. And if I cut it out and unpin it, you can really see how it's changed it. So the front will be on the straight of grain and the extension will be slightly off the grain, but that's sort of hidden when you wear it, so it doesn't matter. Also, again, my waist is not completely on the straight of grain, but again, that's going to be hidden when it's made because you got your bow in front. But the sort of front of it is going to look like it's one piece with the added bonus of fitting. Then the next step is just to add your sleeve and do the same at the back. With the sleeve, what I'm going to do is just, again, use the same method, but I'm also going to show you a little tip on what I did which worked well. Because with something like a semicircle, it is going to be a little bit unbalanced when you make your first trowel, just because of how your shoulder sits, everything. So what I'm actually going to do is draw in a slightly longer, wider sleeve. So can you see it's a bit further down the triangle. So I'm going to draw that in, and then I'm literally drawing it by hand, and then I'm just going to draw my final length next to it, and when you're cutting it out, you sort of got a few centimeters ease or sort of excess. You can play around this to get a really nice balanced hem. And what you could even do is that you turn around in the mirror and just see, does it look level, balanced from all sides? You don't want to get as far as having a level against it. But of course you could use chalk and just make little dots and see whether all these dots are level. Then you just extend your back as well. And for your ties, again, it's up to you how you want to finish it. Whether you're going to do an extension or whether you're going to do a separate tie. But that's your pattern finished. Now you just need to put on the fold and add seam allowance and decide what neck you want to do as well. I've done this one with a V-neck, just so you can see the difference, how it's going to look like. Of course, you can do a normal round neck, but I just think it's nice to have something which works with the bias. I'm just going to quickly mark my other dart as well, and then I would make my first trowel, and again I would probably just do the sleeve without seam allowance, so you can double check you can get your head in. If you can't, you could either make it a bit bigger, you can add some sort of excess, it's up to you really. With the first trowel and bias, it's always a bit of a gamble. To finish off, let's have a look at the two patterns in comparison. You can see they're pretty similar. Of course, the basic one is much shorter because I've taken the tie off, and the same thing would work for the other pattern as well. But these are my two Jiffy tops finished.